And that lets you save.
Who cares?
True Form Life.
Green look on.
September 11th happened, which we all know. I mean, it impacted every single American. But for those of us with loved ones in the military, it was a game changer.
Welcome to Exploring Mind and Body with Drew Tadia. Drew is an expert in nutrition, fitness, lifestyle, and more. And he wants to help you live a healthier, longer, and more active life. Now here's your host, Drew Tadia.
Welcome to another edition of nationally syndicated Exploring Mind and Body. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for tuning in, for being a part of our True Form Life community. We're coming at you with a brand new show. We appreciate whether you're listening on terrestrial radio across the country or as a podcast around the world. We certainly wouldn't be here without you. So stick around. We got all that coming up.
This is Exploring Mind and Body. Naturally improve your lifestyle one show at a time with your host, Drew Tadia.
Welcome to another edition of nationally syndicated Exploring Mind and Body. We are super excited to have Vicki on as a guest. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Vicki.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Drew.
It is our pleasure. I'm excited to get into this interview. Why don't we start off with who you are and what you do? That's probably the best way to get going.
Okay. Well, I'm Vicki Cody. I'm an author. Actually, I was an Army wife for 33 years, and now both of our sons are serving in the military. And that's really the reason I started writing books about Army life. And so it's been a very exciting life. And I just felt a need to put it down in writing and share experiences with other people.
So, and why did you feel like that was something you wanted to share?
Well, there were so many times throughout the whole journey as an Army wife. And actually, I met my husband when he was a cadet at West Point, and we got married 6 years later and experienced a deployment, even had to cancel the wedding at one point because it was the very end of the Vietnam War during that time. And I knew early on that our life was so different from our siblings, our friends back home. We're both from small towns in Vermont. And so we got married and began this journey of Army life. And I just never dreamed where it would take us. And I was with him from the time he was a lieutenant all the way to 4-star general. And in the meantime, we had 2 sons, raised them, and they both decided to follow in their dad's footsteps. And there were just so many times when I felt like our life was extraordinary and so unique and stressful and challenging, but also these great, great moments. And we met so many people along the way. And so I think I was always formulating it in my mind that I wanted to write this down, but there was just never time. I was so busy living life. And I tell people now that it really was the events of September 11th, 2001 that set me on this path of finally deciding, you know what, I've got stuff. I need to write about this. When September 11th happened, my husband was the commanding general of the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And so he was a 2-star general. Both of our sons were just barely beginning their Army careers. One was still in college. One was in helicopter flight school. September 11th happened, which we all know. I mean, it impacted every single American. But for those of us with loved ones in the military, it was a game changer. I mean, that day I realized it wasn't just going to impact my husband. It was going to impact our sons. And our oldest son, the one that was in flight school, actually called his dad the next day and said, "Dad, I know you're going to war, and I want to go with you. Get me to the 101st. So, gosh, that just set off this whole chain reaction. Our son came to the 101st. Within a couple of months, he was on a plane headed to Afghanistan for combat. And so that was when I started to think, holy crap, I've been doing it all these years with my husband, and I knew the deal. I could live with that. We had been through deployments. We had been through all the ups and downs, and we had come out just fine. And I thought, okay, I can do this. But it was a whole other ball game when it was our sons. And that began this cycle of deployments for both of our sons. Our younger son ended up going to flight school. At one point, I had both boys in Iraq in the same unit flying Apache helicopters. My husband was one of the top generals in the Army. So the first thing I wrote actually was a booklet for families of soldiers, because I felt like there was nothing out there to guide people. You know, we were embroiled in this war, and it was obvious to me that it wasn't going to end anytime soon. So I wrote this little booklet, like a 64-page booklet, to kind of guide parents through deployments, just the Army in general. And it was so well received, and it just really sparked something in me then that I thought, you know what, I am going to write the whole story. So after that, a few years later, I wrote Army Wife, my first memoir that was all about our life as in the Army. And then most recently, I wrote the book Fly Safe, that's based on the letters that my husband wrote me in Desert Storm. So
what was it like when you had your kids that they wanted to be in the military? Did you not want that, or were you for that?
No, that's what's so crazy. I was so into that. It was like, this was our way of life. And like I said, you know, we had lived through all this stuff, and it had been really, really a great life, you know, in spite of all those challenges. And you know what, I'm going to touch on that in just a minute. But, you know, through all of it, it was great. So it was very natural when our both sons started saying, hey, I'm going to do what Dad does. I want to fly Apache helicopters. So my husband and I, we were like so proud. It's like, wow, this is just great. But then September 11th happened. You know, I kept thinking, oh, the boys will go in the Army. They'll have nice little careers. So they'll fly helicopters. I'm not going to worry about that. You know, their dad's been doing it. But the combat is what changed it. Right out of flight school, my kids were going. And we're talking 6 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan for the older one and 3 tours for the younger one. I have to say, it is a whole other level of stress, worry, fear when it's your kids, because I still saw them as my little boys, you know. And I always felt like my husband was indestructible. Nothing was going to happen to him. But when it was our sons, and even my husband felt the same way, it was suddenly, we just looked at each other. There were so many times during the initial war in Iraq, and our boys were there. We had no word from them. We couldn't find out what was going on. And, you know, it didn't matter that my husband was a 4-star general, that we had been doing this for 25, 30 years. In that moment, we were just parents of soldiers, and we feared for their safety. And so, yeah, it's been a whole other ball game, and our sons are still doing it, and I'm still worried about them.
How do you deal with that stress? Like, I could not imagine what that would be like as a parent. I'm a new parent. Everything worries me.
Yeah, exactly.
But like in a situation like that, my gosh, how do you deal with that?
Well, so, you know, all my years as an Army wife, and my husband did quite a few dangerous and courageous things in his career, and he was always pushing the envelope in helicopters and what he was doing. I learned early on I was going to have to compartmentalize. I could not day to day just live with the fear that something was going to happen to my husband, and then eventually, you know, with our sons. So I had learned that early on. And I also am one of those people, maybe by nature, but certainly the nature of this business. Time and time again, I was tested and kind of backed into a corner where I had to like let it go and either rely on my faith in God or my faith in my husband, because I could not control the outcome. It was going to happen, whatever. I had to just go along with it, but I had to figure out ways, and I became, I think, pretty good at it, where I adapted to the situation. Once we had kids, I knew they were the most important thing. I had to take good care of them. I couldn't be sitting around all day worrying about what their dad was doing. I had to live life, raise these kids, and maybe that's why they did well with it all and chose to do it themselves. But I learned to not only compartmentalize, but face those challenges head on and have something good come out of it. And I would say the good that came out of our son's deployments was that I started writing and sharing these experiences with others so that it would help them, give them something to relate to. But at the same time, I love to reach non-military readers, people that really have no affiliation with the military, maybe don't know much about it, and they read my stories and my books, and suddenly they come away with a whole new perspective about what it's like to serve in the military, what it's like for the families back home. I like to just give a glimpse into this way of life. So that's what helped me deal with our sons being in the military, and just always, looking for that silver lining. And there's always a silver lining, I mean, it's like when you go through things, challenges and overcome hurdles, to me, life is so much sweeter on the other side. I mean, my husband and I, we just celebrated 47 years of marriage.
Congratulations.
We're as happy as can be. We feel so fortunate that we are living this life, and he's semi-retired now, and we have the time and the means to travel and do a lot of different things. And I just think we appreciate life so much more.
What is it like coming back from something like that? You can speak through your husband, through your kids. We only know, our audience likely only knows through movies and maybe books like yours, but what is it like from them coming back through such, well, I don't know what you call it, trauma, stress, excitement?
Right. Yeah. I noticed that, like, each time they would come home, with my husband, it was different. It was more of the, oh my gosh, it was like, that's my soulmate, and he's coming home, and there's this honeymoon period where you're just like so, glad to be together, and then reality sets in, and we would always go through this period of reintegration where, there were the little power struggles over things, and we had to work through issues. It wasn't always, smooth sailing, but we would get through it. So obviously with our sons, it wasn't like that. It was just, I was just so glad to wrap my arms around them each time they got off that plane after a deployment. And then what I noticed was, like a day or two after the fact, I would just have like a meltdown where I would be crying for absolutely no reason. And I remember our son, saying, "Mom, why are you crying? I'm home. I'm safe." I said, "Clint, you don't understand the emotion for 9 months. Well, sometimes it was 12 months. For 12 months, having all that stress, all that emotion locked inside of me and trying really hard to be strong and not cave into it. Then they come home and it's like, where do you put that energy?" So I would always have like a meltdown where I would cry, and it was happiness, obviously. My kids were okay, but it was like, okay, now what do I do with this energy? Because for all those months I had been focused on, I'm going to stay strong. I'm going to support other families. I'm going to do what I can. And my husband was in this high position where he and I were actually traveling around the country to different posts and meeting with families and spouses and soldiers. And I always wanted to be that role model that they could all look to. And then it would just kind of come crashing down after the fact. Then it would be like within a week or two, it was like it had never happened. You just bounce back to normal life.
How close is the lifestyle you live to Hollywood movies? Do they do a good job? Is it accurate, or is it completely fabricated?
Well, I haven't seen anything good in a while, and I have always wanted to write a screenplay for one of or both of my books and really get it right. There was a TV show, I don't know, about 10 years ago called Army Wives. And that show started out really good. And then after a while, I felt like it was like total Hollywood. It was like, it wasn't real at all.
Right.
So I would love to be the one that brings that to life.
So that would be a goal for you moving forward, to see if you can.
I'd love to do that. Yeah.
That would be amazing. Yeah. I just think about, like, I really enjoy those type of movies. I really enjoy the military, like Saving Private Ryan, Black Hawk Down, American Sniper.
Okay, those movies. Yes. Okay. You're right. And Black Hawk Down. I mean, my husband was part of that unit. He didn't go on the mission, but he had trained the special operations pilots. He was their commander the year leading up to that. Oh man, that was so hard to watch that, because those were people we knew that got killed. That was rough, but that was very brutally honest. And Saving Private Ryan too, with his own own spin on it.
Do you guys watch those type of movies? I don't know what you call them.
We love it. Yeah.
You
yeah.
both watch those movies?
Oh, yes. Over and over. Yeah. Yeah. As hard as it is sometimes, we're always looking to see, did they get it right?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned those two movies. I was thinking more of like fictional type movies from the past that were about the war, and they're very romantic and glamorized.
How about MASH? Do you remember that one?
Oh, yeah. We used to watch that. You were probably too young. You probably weren't born yet.
I don't remember MASH that well. I just remember it was on. Okay. I'm interested to know, so you traveled quite a bit?
Yes.
Tell us about some of your favorite places, maybe a favorite story you have from where you've been.
Well, first of all, we started out in Hawaii when we first got married. So that was pretty awesome to live in Hawaii. And then at one point in like 1987, 1988, we lived in Seoul, Korea. That was super interesting. And then, most of the assignments, a lot of the Army posts are in kind of out of the way places like Fort Hood, Texas. It's like in Killeen, Texas, and Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And what I always found was it wasn't always the location. It was always the people. We would live on an Army post surrounded by other Army families. Our kids grew up in these neighborhoods where all the dads, and then later on there were some moms that were in the military, but certainly all their friends' dads were. We were surrounded by people that were living the same life as us. And we have these lifelong friends that we still get together with. So it was always those experiences. It wasn't so much anything real glamorous, except Hawaii was. And then when my husband was the vice chief of staff and during the war years, I traveled with him wherever there was an Army post that had soldiers deployed. So we went to Alaska, Hawaii, all over the United States, and we would meet with the families. And it would be, those meetings would stay with us. Sometimes I still get choked up. I remember being at Fort Carson, Colorado, and we were meeting with these spouses, and they were so worn out. Their soldier husbands were on their second and third deployments to Iraq. And right after we left there, some of those soldiers were killed. And it broke my heart because we had just been with those wives, and I knew that they were getting notified. That was the hardest thing I ever went through with my husband. It was hard because our sons were deployed too. And so I would look at these young wives and I would think about our daughter-in-laws, and if that happened to us, you can't help but put yourself in their shoes. But I remember those experiences so vividly. And, my hope is that somehow my husband and I, by meeting with them and by having some credibility because we had sons deployed, my hope is that we helped them in some way, that we touched their lives.
How are they notified? Because you see it in the movies, and then that's all I can reference, I guess. Yeah. But are they notified? Someone comes, knocks on their door.
Yeah. If it's a death, they come in person. If it's an injury, they get called. And again, my husband and I have been part of those over the years too. Early on, when we were just had only been married a couple of years, right after my husband went to flight school, we started losing friends in helicopter accidents. And I can't tell you how many times we sat with a young wife whose husband had just been killed. And it was somebody we knew very well. That's the rough side of military life. And, it's not always in combat. It can be training accidents. I've had to be part of those where the chaplain asked me to go and we made notifications. Yeah.
That's got to be tough.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
Were you able to get a chance to meet any presidents throughout your travels?
Yes. First of all, during Desert Storm, when my husband was over in Desert Storm, I got to meet Barbara Bush, President Bush's wife. She came to Fort Campbell and I got to meet her personally. Then later we got to meet President George W. Bush and Laura Bush a couple of times. They actually came to Fort Campbell right after September 11th and spent the day with us right before Thanksgiving. And that was a memorable occasion. And then once my husband was stationed here at the Pentagon, we got to go to the White House numerous times. It was always when George Bush was in office.
So is your husband at the Pentagon now, or was he?
Well, he's retired, Drew. He retired in 2008. and then had 10 years in the corporate world. And then about a year ago, the Pentagon called him back and asked him to be a senior mentor for the chief of staff and the senior Army staff. So he worked his way back in because he can never give it up. But he's now wearing a suit. So he's a civilian at the Pentagon, and he says he works part-time, but it's not. He works but you know what? Hey, if he loves it, and he still has so much to give. So you know what? If he wants to do it, I'm fine with that. So yeah,
That's
he
great.
still has his finger on the pulse.
So then for you guys, are you going in and out of them? I'm trying to get to the security. Like if you're seeing presidents and you're going to the Pentagon, is there extensive security just to get into these places?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah. So, but, you know, my husband, because of who he is, you know, I have access to a lot of those things. But yeah, there's a lot of security. And actually, one of our sons is at the Pentagon right now. And his office is just down the hall from my husband's little cubicle. It's kind of cute. And our older son was at the Pentagon last year. But yeah, we haven't been to the White House lately. So, but yeah, there's a lot of security. But, you know, my husband always has like a top secret clearance. So, you know, he's good to go anywhere.
So is that concerning for you as the wife or spouse to know that, you know, you have that top level security? There's got to be some information that can't be shared. You know what I mean?
Well, not so much now, but all the years when he was still on active duty. Yes, you know, and there were years when he was in special operations units. Oh, geez, that was hard for me because I'm a talker. And he would always say to me, Vicki, you cannot say a word about this. So a lot of stuff he just didn't tell me. There's some little gaps in our marriage when he was off doing really high-level clandestine operations, and I had to just find out about it after the fact. And actually, when I wrote this last book, Fly Safe, the one about the Gulf War, my husband, he had this huge mission. He fired the first shots of the war. So it was this top secret mission. And of course, when he came home, I knew all about it, and I'd read about it in the papers, and I read about it in the history books and everything. But it wasn't until I started writing my version of it, and I talked to some of his former pilots, and, you know, I wanted to get, because my husband would say, oh, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it was no big deal. So I talked to other people. And when they gave me the skinny on it, I mean, it was some hair-raising stuff. And it's like 30 years after the fact, I'm finding out just how dangerous that mission was. And I could have been writing a whole other story if it had, you know, turned out different. But
probably better you didn't know about it then.
Exactly. Yes.
I know this is I've written a few books myself. This is the hardest question I can ask. If there's one specific part that you wanted to make sure that your readers read, what would that be?
Well, okay, it would be the chapter on his mission when he goes to do this thing that any number of things could have happened and he wouldn't have come back. But you know what the best part was? When I decided to write it, I hadn't looked at the letters in so long. He wrote 94 letters to me while he was gone those 10 months. And this is a guy that was really busy. He was commanding a unit. I don't know how he found the time, but I reread all the letters from start to finish, all in one sitting. And what I came away with was how much he loved me, how much he loves me. And I wish that I had read those letters, you know, the times when we're in one of those lulls where it's kind of like, you know, not that it was that routine, but, you know, when maybe you don't feel appreciated, maybe you don't know that what you're doing for your husband and your family is important. Well, I read those letters, and in every single letter, he told me how proud he was of me, how thankful that I stayed with him, stayed the course through this crazy life. And it was like, wow, it was pretty amazing to me. It was an eye-opener. I always knew, I mean, he's always been demonstrative, but way more personal in these letters. And this was back when we'd only been married 15 years. So I came away with it thinking, I am like the luckiest person in the world, and I know he is too, because I feel the same way about him. But it was like really good to do that at this point in our lives. And as I would write chapters and have him read the chapters, that was the other thing that was really eye-opening. He would look at me and he'd say, Vicki, I didn't realize what I put you through. I had no idea what it was like for you. But when he read, well, both books were an eye-opener for him to see my perspective. So I think that was the best part about writing both books, and certainly the most recent book.
Sounds like you guys are still very much in love. I think that's rare, especially
we
this
are.
day and age.
We're very connected.
Do you have any advice for any of our young couples that might appreciate some words?
I always tell people, stay the course if you can. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were times when my husband drove me nuts, or when we had to move to another place and I didn't really want to, but it was important to him. And, we started out very much in love. We dated for 6 years. We knew going into it that we really did love each other. It wasn't like, just a passing thing. So we always had that to fall back on. So even during the times when it was rough and reintegration after he'd come back from something, and I would think, wow, we're never going to get back on track. Just by staying true to each other and communicating, and the original premise that we married each other for love, it gets you through everything. And then it's like now we look back and we think, wow, we are so lucky that we have all this history with each other. And we raised 2 good kids, and they seem to be happily married. They've got a couple of little boys each, we have 4 grandsons. I just always say, it's not, you don't get to script your life. You don't get to say, oh, our marriage is going to be perfect from start to finish. If somebody had told me going into this what we were going to face and what we were going to overcome, wow, Drew, I probably wouldn't have done it. I would have stayed in small town Vermont, But oh my gosh, what an extraordinary roller coaster ride it's been, and the joys and the pride have so outweighed any of the challenges. I wouldn't trade any of it, none of it. It's all been amazing.
It's fantastic, Vicki. Is there anything that we missed that you wanted to cover?
No, I think Drew, I think you asked all the good questions. You certainly let me talk a lot. No, I feel like well, you know what I would say too. My books aren't just for military people. Honestly, I talk about all these things in very universal terms, I think, and my books are entertaining. I hope that civilian readers will give my books a chance, because it's not just for Army wives or Army spouses and military people.
All right. And then so if someone wants to purchase your books, or do you offer any other services, or is it specifically books that you sell?
Books, I do get asked to speak at things. I love to talk about this way of life as well. And so I'm always agreeable if someone is having some kind of an event and they want me to speak. I have a website, Vicki Cody, VICKICODY.com. You can find out all about me, my books. My books are available everywhere, wherever books are sold, certainly on Amazon, but check out your local indie bookstore. They can order them. So VickiCody.com, and I'd love to hear from you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Vicki. I appreciate you coming on today and sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you, Drew. It's been my pleasure. It was fun.
You're welcome.
True Form Life.
All right, that's going to wrap things up for this edition of Exploring Mind and Body. Once again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for tuning in and being a part of our True Form Life community. You can always find us on Facebook.com/TrueFormLife. We post up there a couple times a day on our story. We're always trying to bring you more content around living a healthy lifestyle, whether that be nutrition, fitness, lifestyle, and more. We also have free challenges that we do at least once a month. So if you follow us along there, you'll be able to join maybe a plank challenge or a squat challenge, Tabata challenge, whatever it may be. We'd love to have you join us. We're also on Instagram.com/DrewTadia. Again, we're posting up there a couple times a day along with our story, all dedicated to keeping you fit and healthy and on track. Our main website is trueformlife.com. If you want to check out some of our products, some of our services, or if you just want some great content from videos to blog posts and recipes and more, we got all that at trueformlife.com. Once again, thank you so much for being here. That's it. That's all I got. I'm out of here. As always, I'm your host, Drew Tadia, in health and fitness for a better world. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Exploring Mind and Body with Trueform Life's Drew Tadia, fitness expert. To find out more about the show, Drew Tadia, or to listen to past shows, visit exploringmindandbody.com.